Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're jumping right into, well, the really critical part of CMMC. Phase 2, the conduct assessment stage.
Yeah, this is where it all comes together or potentially falls apart for defense contractors.
Absolutely. It's that moment of truth. All the security work you've done gets put under the microscope.
And our goal today, really, is to give you the playbook. How does an assessor think? What's the logic they use? Because getting that MET score isn't just about having controls.
Right, it's more nuanced.
It's about mastering two things. Understanding the anatomy of a CMMC practice, like what are the required parts, and, crucially, hitting the evidence standard. We need to go beyond what you need to how much proof and where that proof needs to apply.
That how much and where a piece. That's huge, because you can have perfect documentation, theoretically, but still fail if it doesn't cover everything.
Exactly. The whole process hinges on the CMMC assessment process, or CAP, specifically this phase 2. And that phase uses those three main methods assessors employ: examine, interview, and test. We'll dig into those.
Okay, and just a quick level set before I dive deeper. Level 1.
Level 1, that's foundational. 17 practices focused on protecting federal contract information, FCI. It lines up with the FR Clause 52.20421, and it's often self-attested.
Got it. But the real heavy lifting, and probably where most of our listeners are focused, is Level 2.
Level 2 is the advanced tier, yeah. Protecting controlled unclassified information, CUI. That means implementing all 110 practices from NIST SP 800-171 Revision 2.
And crucially, it requires that third-party assessment every 3 years. So understanding how that assessor thinks is paramount.
Precisely. So let's start with the basic building block, the structure of any given CMMC practice. The official assessment guides for both Level 1 and Level 2, they lay it all out. They're the assessor's roadmap.
So when an assessor looks at practice AC.13.1.1, for instance, what specific sections are they breaking it down into? What's the template?
There are essentially 4 core components they're looking at for every single practice. First up is the identifier and practice statement.
Okay, the label, like ACL 13.1.1.
Exactly. Tells you the domain access control, the Level 1, and practice number 3.1.1. It's the basic, what control are we talking about?
Simple enough. What's next?
Next, and this is critical, are the assessment objectives. Think of these as the specific non-negotiable requirements within that practice. They usually have labels like A, D, C, and so on.
And these come from?
Directly from NIST SP 800-171A. It details exactly what needs to be verified for that practice. And here's the kicker.
Uh-oh.
You have to meet every single objective listed for that practice to get a MET score for the overall practice. Miss one objective, just one piece.
And the whole practice is marked not met.
The whole thing, no partial credit. If Objective B says you need to verify identities and you only partially do it or don't have proof for all systems, the entire practice fails, even if you nailed A and C.
Wow, okay. That is a high bar. It makes that checklist nature really stark. You can't just, generally implement the control.
Not at all. Precision is key. The third component is the potential assessment methods and objects.
This tells the assessor how to check.
Exactly. It guides them on how to investigate, examine, interview, test, and what to look at. Are they examining documents, like policies, specifications? Are they looking at technical settings, mechanisms, observing procedures, activities, or talking to your staff?
Individuals, got it. And the last piece.
The discussion or further discussion section. Don't skip this part.
Okay, why is that so important? Is it just extra reading?
No, it's where you find the gold. It provides the vital context, the intent behind the practice, and often gives crucial examples.
Can you give an example?
Sure. For that AC.133.1.1 practice limiting access to authorized users, the discussion clarifies that other systems include systems internal and external to the organization.
Ah, so if you were only thinking about your internal servers and workstations,
you'd miss the requirement entirely if you have external systems handling FCI. That discussion expands the scope explicitly. You have to read it to understand the full expectation.
Makes sense. It prevents you from interpreting the practice too narrowly. Okay, so that's the anatomy. Now, let's talk about phase 2, the actual conduct assessment part. How do those three methods, examine, interview, test, work together?
Well, the assessor uses them to build confidence, layer by layer. Examine E is usually the starting point. It's about looking at your documentation and configurations.
So reviewing policy documents, network diagrams.
Exactly. Data flow diagrams are huge here, especially for confirming the scope of your assessment. They'll look at system configuration settings, maybe system audit logs. Examine confirms your documented intent and setup. It establishes a baseline.
Okay, then comes interview. This is talking to people.
Right. This is where they talk to your system admins, your security personnel, maybe even regular users, depending on the practice. They're trying to understand if people actually know the procedures, if they understand their responsibilities.
Does the interview just confirm what's in the policy?
It helps, but it also checks for understanding and consistent application. Does the sysadmin explain the process the same way the policy describes it? It verifies the human element.
But, okay, let's say I have a fantastic policy document, examine, and my sysadmin gives a perfect explanation in the interview. Why does the assessor still need to test T? Isn't that redundant?
Because test is the validation. It's the show me step. It's where the rubber meets the road. Testing means actively exercising the control or mechanism.
Like actually trying to log in without MFA.
Precisely. Or checking the access control list on a folder containing CUI to see who actually has access right now, not just who the policy says should have access. They compare the actual behavior they observe with the expected behavior based on your policies and interviews.
So examine finds the rule book, interview checks if people know the rules, and test sees if the rules were actually being enforced in reality.
You got it. And using these three methods effectively allows the assessor to determine if the evidence they've gathered is adequate.
Okay, adequate. That sounds important. Let's define that carefully.
It is. And this leads directly into probably the most critical distinction for assessment success: understanding adequate versus sufficient evidence. They sound similar, but they are crucially different.
Right. This is often where organizations stumble. They think they have proof, but it doesn't meet the assessor's standard. Give us an analogy. How can we visualize this?
Okay, think of building a house. Adequate evidence is like checking a single brick. Is this brick well made? Is it the right type? Does it meet the quality standard for this specific spot on the wall?
Okay, so adequacy is about the quality and appropriateness of one piece of evidence for one specific point.
Exactly. Does this screenshot adequately show the firewall rule exists? Does this log entry adequately prove an alert fired? It's about the type of artifact policy, log, screenshot, configuration file, and its depth. Is it convincing for the specific objective it's meant to prove?
Got it. The brick is good quality, but that's not enough to prove the house is well built.
Precisely. That's where sufficient evidence comes in. Sufficiency asks, okay, you showed me one good brick, but did you use that same quality brick everywhere it was needed? Does the evidence cover the entire scope?
So sufficiency is about coverage.
Complete coverage. It answers the assessor's question. Do I have enough of the right kind of evidence to confidently say this practice is met across the entire assessed environment?
And entire assessed environment means?
It means the evidence has to address the full scope agreed upon for the assessment. That includes all the relevant host units like servers and workstations, any supporting units like firewalls or authentication servers, and any specific enclaves that handle CUI.
So if I show you a perfect configuration screenshot for server A,
but your assessment scope includes servers A, B, C, and D, and you don't have similar proof for B, C, and D, then your evidence might be adequate for server A, but it's insufficient overall because it lacks coverage.
okay, let's make that concrete. Give me a real-world example of where evidence might be adequate in type but fail on sufficiency.
Easy one. Let's say you have a policy requiring all remote users accessing CUI to use a company VPN with MFA. You show the assessor the policy document, examine adequate type. You have your lead remote access admin, explain how it's configured, interview adequate depth.
Sounds good so far. What does it fail?
It fails sufficiency if, say, you have a small group of contractors in a different department who access a specific CUI repository through a separate web portal that doesn't enforce that same VPN MFA requirement. Your evidence didn't cover all remote access paths for CUI.
The coverage wasn't complete.
Or another example. You show a screenshot proving the setting for automatic session logout after 15 minutes of inactivity is correctly configured on your main CUI file server. That screenshot is adequate evidence for that server. But if you can't demonstrate through testing or configuration management tools that the same setting is enforced on the 50 laptops that regularly connect and download CUI to their local drives, your evidence is insufficient.
Because the control isn't proven to be deployed universally across the scope.
Exactly. Adequacy checks the control exists and is configured correctly somewhere. Sufficiency demands proof it exists and works correctly everywhere required by the scope. You need both.
That distinction is absolutely critical. You have to think like that assessor, always asking, okay, and where else does this apply?
That's the mindset.
Right, so with that assessor's perspective, let's clarify a couple of practice areas that often cause confusion because they sound similar. First, identification versus authentication. IA.L113.5.1 and IA.L13.5.2.
Yeah, these are foundational but sometimes mixed up. Think of them as two sequential steps for access. IA.L13.5.1 identification is simply the claim, who are you?
Like having a username.
Exactly. It's about identifying the system users, processes acting on behalf of users, or devices that need access. Maintaining that list of authorized users is identification. You're establishing the who.
Okay. Then IA.L13.5.2 authentication is.
That's the proof.
Sure.
Prove you are who you claim to be. This is where passwords, tokens, biometrics, MFA, whatever you use, comes in. Authentication verifies the identity asserted during identification.
So you identify first, claim username, then you authenticate, provide password MFA before you get access.
Precisely. One claims, the other verifies. They work hand in hand as prerequisites for access.
That clears up the level 1 side. Now for a trickier level 2 pair. ACL2 3.1.3 control CUI flow versus SCU tall L2 3.13.3 role separation. Different domains, access control versus system, and communications protection, but sound related.
They do sound related, but they address different security layers. ACL2-3.1.3, controlling CUI flow, is all about the data's journey. Think network traffic.
Like firewalls and proxies.
Yes. It's about regulating where CUI can travel, preventing CUI from being sent to unauthorized external destinations, blocking traffic pretending to be internal, maybe enforcing encryption for CUI in transit, using boundary protection devices. It manages the information pathways.
Okay, so flow control is about the pipes and borders for the data itself. What about role separation then? SCL2 3.13.3.
Role separation, sometimes called separation of duties in other contexts, is about managing people's functions and their access to critical administrative interfaces. It's not about the data's path, but about who gets the keys to the control room.
So preventing a regular user from having the ability to, say, change firewall rules or manage user accounts.
Exactly that. It's about separating general user functionality, like using email or editing documents, from system management or privileged functions, like server administration, database management, network configuration.
And why is that important?
It drastically reduces the attack surface. If a standard user account gets compromised, the attacker doesn't immediately gain administrative control over your network. It limits the blast radius.
How is it implemented? Is it just different logins?
It can be logical, using separate privileged accounts for administrative tasks that regular users don't have. Or it could even be physical, requiring admins to use a separate dedicated workstation or connect from a specific secure network segment to perform high-privileged tasks.
So flow control manages data movement across boundaries. Role separation manages user access to powerful system functions, different layers entirely.
Correct. One manages the what? Data. The other manages the who privileged access.
Okay, that makes sense. So pulling this all together, succeeding in a CMMC Phase 2 assessment really comes down to mastering those details. You need to internalize the practice structure, know those objectives inside out.
Yes, treat those objectives like your build checklist.
And then critically, provide evidence that is both adequate in its depth and type for each objective, and sufficient in its coverage across your entire scope.
Couldn't have said it better. Adequate quality, sufficient quantity, and spread.
Which brings us to a final thought, something for you listeners to really consider, especially regarding Level 2. What happens if you don't quite meet a practice during the assessment?
Right, so CMMC Level 2 does allow for a couple of things. Limited practice deficiency correction during the assessment itself, and potentially plans of action and milestones, or POA&Ms, for certain unmet practices afterwards. But, and this is a big but,
there are significant strings attached.
very significant. First, to even be eligible for a conditional certification with POA&Ms, you have to achieve a minimum score, which essentially means passing most of the practices outright. The current target is hitting 88 out of 110 practices.
Okay, so you can't fail too many.
No. Second, any POA&Ms you get are strictly time-bound. You typically have only 180 days to fix the deficiencies and get reassessed on them.
That's a tight turnaround.
It is. And most importantly, you cannot have a POA&M for certain high-weighted fundamental practices. Think things like critical access controls, incident response planning, risk assessments, or key security configuration settings like FIPS validated encryption. Those must be met at the time of assessment.
So you can't just plan to fix the really important stuff later.
Absolutely not. And here's the final kicker related to sufficiency and adequacy. Even if a practice is eligible for a POA&M, and you have a plan, if it's not fully implemented and demonstrable across the entire scope during the assessment, it gets marked not implemented initially.
Meaning, if you're rolling out, say, FIPS encryption. SC.UL2 3.13.11, and it's only on 75% of the required systems by assessment day.
Even with a POA&M, to finish the last 25%, the practice is assessed as not implemented. You get 0 points for it until it's 100% done, verified, and the POA&M is closed. The assessment looks at your posture now, not your intentions for the next 180 days.
That's a critical planning factor. Relying on POA&Ms is a risky strategy. The goal has to be full implementation before the assessor walks in the door.
That's the only way to approach it for a smooth assessment. Aim for full implementation, verified by adequate and sufficient evidence. That's the path to success.
Excellent insights. Thank you for breaking down the assessor's view of Phase 2 for us. Listeners, really take that adequate versus sufficient distinction to heart nail that down, and you're well on your way. We'll talk to you on the next deep dive.